This is the second half of an interview with Bill Lair at his home in Meridian, Texas, on August 20th, 2010. Interviewer is Eileen Hurst from Central Connecticut State University. Bill, we had talked about your involvement in World War II, and we had finished up where you came back home to the United States and went back to school, got your degree in geological engineering. But you were also involved as a civilian to a heavy degree in Laos during the Vietnam era. And that's what we'll talk about in this interview. Can you start by telling me how you got involved in the CIA? Because, all right, you came home from World War II, went back to college at Texas A&M, is that correct?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so what happened then?
Well, then when I got near graduation time I mean, everybody's, all of the people who are getting ready to graduate are thinking about what they're going to do, how they're going to get a job. And what I really thought I would be doing is working for some oil company in places like South America, where we were busy drilling new oil fields. But then just before I graduated, all of a sudden the Korean War started. And because of my background and everything, I thought that I would probably have to go back in the Army. The Army might very well be calling me because, the war in Asia was starting and they needed a lot of people. And I would be an obvious choice because I'd already been involved in so many different wars, and so I thought that's why I believed that I probably should think myself about what I was really going to do. And then I saw the bulletin board, a note on the bulletin boards in the hallway at A&M that said anybody who was interested in intelligence go to room so-and-so. So I went down to that room. There was a lady there, and she didn't really know anything about it. But she said
Did you know what that even meant, what intelligence was?
Oh yeah, I know. But I knew it from a military standpoint. You send out patrols and they get information, and you get all the answers that they have from them. So I knew basically what intelligence was. But I didn't know anything about it because the CIA was a brand new organization, and nobody had ever really heard of it.
What year was this?
1950.
So you went down to the room?
Yeah, and so what she did then is she said she would call the man who was interested in talking to me, and then he would get in touch with me. He would call me. So she knew where I was staying. So he called me, and so then I went to the hotel. They were staying at the Aggieland Inn, which was a hotel that belonged to the university right on the campus. So I went down there and talked to him, and he explained to me what the CIA was and what they did. It had grown out of OSS in World War II, and they were interested in hiring new people, and they were interested in me because of my World War II experience and my education and all. So, and then I talked to them at some length, and then they called me back one day and said that that if I still wanted to work for the CIA, that I definitely had a job with the CIA. But they said, we don't want you to go to Washington yet, so you can go ahead and do whatever you want to do. It might take a month. So.
Had you graduated yet?
Oh yeah, I'd already graduated. I was getting ready to at this point.
Yeah.
So then my mother wanted to go to Montana because we had a lot of relatives up there. So I went with her on a trip to Montana. And they could call me anywhere, you know. And so I came back, and then I got a call from them that they said, yeah, we want you to go to Washington on a certain date. You just go on up there, and they gave me an address to go to. It was you know, it was one of those. It wasn't in the big building. It was a small building where they had an office, I guess. So I got to Washington, and it so happened that they had, at the same time they hired me, they had hired my roommate.
Your roommate from Texas A&M?
Yeah.
And neither of you knew that the other had joined up with the CIA? He must have seen the same notice.
I don't remember exactly how that really ended, but
when you
once
got
I
to
knew that, you know,
Washington,
I
found
talked
each
to
other?
him. No, I talked to him before we went up there.
Oh.
And we agreed that, I don't remember if we went together at the same time. I don't remember for sure. But when we got there, we met, and we ended up staying at this rooming house right on DuPont Circle. You know, and we shared we stayed in the same little apartment. We had
So
two
you were
bedrooms.
roommates once again.
Yeah.
Now,
But we knew ahead of time.
what was your roommate's name?
Hooker, Bob Hooker.
Now, when you and Bob Hooker went to Washington, was this just for a meeting, or was this to stay for
Oh
the
no,
actual training?
we were being hired.
Oh, so
We
you
were,
were being hired, and you
we
were
were
gonna have to
definitely hired.
and you were going to have to stay in Washington.
Yeah.
You weren't
And
going
so we
home.
met up there. I don't remember if we actually went together, but we met there, and we went together, and we found this rooming house right off the DuPont Circle in Washington there. And, you know, so we rented this little apartment type deal with 2 bedrooms and a living room and a bathroom. I think it was a community bathroom right off the building, and it was not very expensive. That's why we went there, you know. So, and then we went. I don't remember if we went together or not. I don't think so. When I've had I met first met with the CIA up there, and they. So then they put me. They said they had this training they called it an estate in Maryland. You know, it was a big house with a lot of rooms and just trees and grass all around. So it was kind of isolated, and that's where they were going to do the training. That was just classroom stuff first. So we would go there every day, and we were staying in DuPont Circle, which really wasn't too far from where.
So you commuted every day from DuPont Circle to this estate in Maryland?
And went to the classes every day.
And it was just classroom? What kinds of things did they train you to do there?
Oh, about intelligence, and then they trained us in how to go and clandestinely meet people, and we could go to downtown Washington and do a lot of stuff like that. And after we trained there for a while, I forget how long, maybe 2 or 3 weeks, then they sent us to Fort Benning for the field training, I guess they called it. So we went down to Fort Benning, and they moved us into what was the old Ranger training area. And then we began the field training.
And what did that consist of?
Well, just teaching you how to operate in the boondocks, and about guerrilla warfare and all the tactics of guerrilla warfare, and of which I already knew a lot, but it was a good course. They had the people who taught it were, a lot of them had been involved in this kind of thing with OSS in World War II, mostly in Europe.
Do you think that most of the instructors were former OSS officers?
Yeah, I think they all were. They all were. And a lot of them had been in some pretty big guerrilla type battles, mainly in the like Yugoslavia and those kind of places. because we had a lot of operations in World War II in that area against the, you know, because they were all against the Nazis. So you had a lot of stuff there. So it was pretty good training. No,
How long was that field training?
I know we stayed. I think it was at least 6 or 8 weeks.
Oh.
Maybe a little longer, about that.
That training, was it just?
But then it ended up, we went through the regular. It was at Fort Benning, but we were trained in the old what they call Ranger Training Area. But then we went through the standard Army parachute training school, and made our first jumps there.
Had you ever parachuted before?
No.
So what was that like? So you had to actually go through what the Rangers went through to learn how to parachute?
But anybody who studied, yeah, and you know, in World War II we had 2 airborne divisions, infantry divisions that were airborne, and they all learned how to jump out of airplanes. But you know, jumping out of airplanes is not a complicated affair. I mean, you just dive out and the gravity does the work. All you really have to do is build up the courage to go out the door.
Well, that would be.
And it's not easy because, you know, people are naturally afraid of heights. You look at a baby, that's one of the first things. If you take a baby and push him way up in the air, he gets scared. They're afraid of heights. It's a natural human fear of falling. And so everybody, the first time you jump out of that airplane, it scares the devil out of you, no matter what. But they all try to say, "Oh no, I wasn't scared at all." You know it's not true because it's human, right? It's actually human. But I like the airborne units because if you are courageous enough to join an airborne unit where you have to learn how to go out that door and scare the hell out of you, you're going to be a pretty good soldier because you learn how to overcome
that
fear. And you're going to be, if you go into, you know, in a combat situation, you're going to be scared every day. So, you know, you got to learn how to operate in spite of your fear. And then, for me, you had to learn how to teach others and convince them that you're not really that afraid, you know, when they really are.
At that stage, since you were just in your initial training yourself, supposedly you had no other background. Did they have to give you weapons training and that kind of stuff too?
Oh yeah, you had all the weapons training, firing ranges, all of that kind of stuff. But you know, I'd already done a lot of that in the Army, and I hunted and everything. I was already a good shot. And you know, because right here, we have a lot of deer and stuff here if you want to hunt. I mean, once you have been hunted yourself, hunting deer seems to be not an exciting thing to do. The poor deer is defenseless. So the hunter has no danger to himself. But if you're hunting people, then that's the real danger to yourself. So I think almost everybody who's done a lot of where they had to deal against people in those kind of situations, most of them lose their real interest in hunting animals. You know, it doesn't seem, it's nothing. The poor defenseless animal just, he's just that. Now if you had to go fight with a grizzly bear, that'd be different. But anyway, that's...
So after your training in Maryland, where did you guys go?
Well, I say then we went to Fort Benning. I told you about that's what this with the parachute training and all that. Then we went back and had another session. I think we still worked out of Maryland, but most of our time was on the streets in Washington because you learned how to have clandestine meetings and all of that kind of stuff.
So you would practice?
Yeah, we practiced.
In Washington, D.C.?
Yeah, because you're in the metropolitan area, so And so you learn how to meet agents,
At this
clandestine.
point, you had probably figured out pretty much what this was gonna entail. What were you thinking then? Did you think you made the right decision?
Oh yeah, I mean, I always liked what I was doing. There's no question about that. Now, whether you made the right decision remains. I figured if I made a mistake, it was the fact that I still didn't go to work for some oil company and look for oil wells. And I still believe today that if I had gone into the geology side, I would probably have a lot more money than I have right now. Because I was smart. I knew what I was doing. And I think I would have done well at it. So, but I don't look at that as a big disadvantage. And I think because of the satisfaction of doing what I did, it overcomes all of that. So I'm not sorry that I did it at all.
So, what did you do after you had your practice on Washington streets and you had your parachute training and weapons training? What was the next step in CIA training?
They took, well, that was it for the CIA training.
That was it, then you
So
were an
at that
agent.
point, they told me that I was going to Thailand.
That soon they knew.
Yeah. So the first place they,
1950?
well, yeah, because I arrived in Thailand on the 1st of March, 1951. But the first step they sent me to Florida, because I was going overseas as an employee of a company called the Sea Supply Company.
Sea Supply?
SEA, Sea Supply Company.
Was that their cover company?
Yeah, and they had already set up an office in Thailand, but their headquarters was in Miami. And the guy who was the head of the CIA was also the lawyer for the city of Miami. But he had worked for OSS before.
Who was that?
Oh, I can't remember his name. I'm sure he's long dead by now. But so I can't remember the name right now.
We can look it up later.
And so from there, then I mean, they'd already told me I was going to Thailand. So then I flew by plane from Miami to New York. And then got on a plane that was going to, we first flew to, it was either Norway, one of those Scandinavian countries up there. And stayed overnight. And then I got the plane. I know we made another stop in Germany, but just not even overnight. Then I flew to India. Because, you know, then the planes didn't fly as far as they do now. So we landed in India, and then the next southern India, and then I think from there we flew directly to Bangkok.
What was your assignment in Thailand?
Well, you know, when I got to Thailand, somebody picked me up, and they already had an office there. They had a house, and it served both as an office and a house. And there was a doctor and a couple of other guys who lived there. I think they all worked for the CIA. They'd already been sent there. A medical doctor, and then those two guys who had both served in OSS in World War II. And I stayed there. They had a house out on the lawn. It was like a guest house. And then Jeff arrived, and we lived in that little guest house.
Who's Jeff?
Jeff Cheek. He was the one. He was in my class at the CIA, and we both went to work together in Thailand for a while.
So
but Jeff didn't stay too long. But he was a graduate at A&M, but I didn't really know him at A&M because he was majoring in some something about agriculture or something like that. I was in the School of Engineering. So anyway, but we didn't arrive together. I was there before him, and then they had a C-47 that belonged to I get whoever the forerunner of Air America probably, but it was from the people who had the pilots had all been flying with the Flying Tigers in the warfare. They all worked for the same company, and they were all good people, really good pilots, and they would do anything. I mean, eventually they're the ones who, when we for a while we tried to support the Tibetans in a fight against the Chinese, and they brought out a whole bunch of Tibetans and trained them in the U.S., and then they brought them up to North Thailand, and from there those cat planes flew them and dropped them in Tibet. And those fat pilots were the best in the world, no question about it. And they were so courageous. They would go anywhere.
Well, the ones that were in Thailand when you arrived in 1950, where were they flying? Why were they there at that time?
Well, we actually, at the time I got there, we had one C-47 stationed in Thailand and flown by CAT, had a pilot. But when the war started heating up, like the Tibet thing, they had a base in North Thailand, and it was set up to fly out of there. And General Adderholt, he was the guy who set up that base. He was in the Air Force, but he was working for the CIA actually, and he set up that base. And from that base, the ones who flew to Tibet, for example. And even earlier than that, when the French were still in Indochina, right? And they were fighting at Dien Bien Phu. The communists had it surrounded. The French were still operating there, and the French didn't really. And so it got so hot. They had on top of the high ground. The Viet Minh had put so many anti-aircraft guns, and they were shooting at those planes. So the French Air Force refused to fly and drop at Dien Bien Phu or pick up people. They just wouldn't do it. So who did it? Air America. Those same fat pilots. They went in every day and dropped. In fact, they lost one plane. One plane got shot down on there. He got hit really bad. He couldn't make it back, so he was trying to fly to Thailand. He eventually crashed in Laos, just sort of getting to the Thailand. And of course, they were all killed. Because he said, in talking on the radio, they asked him, why you don't bail out. Oh, he said, I'm too fat to be walking around in yellow. I'm not going to bail out. I'm going to try to get to Thailand. If I don't make it, that's it. But they were that kind of guys, you see. And then he finally said on the radio, well, we're going in here. This rain looks such that I seriously doubt if I'm going to live through it. And I think eventually years after the war all stopped, they found his body just short of Thailand, in the wreckage of the airplane.
Wow.
What was his name? Earthquake Magoon.
That was his name?
That's what everybody called him, Magoon. Earthquake Magoon. There are many stories about him. He was a gutsy guy who would go anywhere. I mean, they had some great people in this thing.
So how long did you live in that little guest house?
Not long. And the first thing they did, that C-47, they flew us up to Lopburi, Thailand. Lopburi, it was a military base, Lopburi. And there were 3 old buildings that hadn't been used in a long time out by themselves out in the, away from towns. And the agency had decided to set up training there. So they sent me and Jeff Cheek. We went up, actually after we went up first and looked at it with them. And then they told us to go out and buy a car, a vehicle of some kind. So we bought a 4-wheel drive vehicle, an old Land Rover is what it was. And then we drove up to Lowbury, Jeff and I. And you know, after we got out of town and the damn vehicle broke down. So we stopped and we're working on it. And it was all just woods on each side of the road, but people started popping out of the woods. You know, pretty soon we probably had maybe 20 people watching us, and we couldn't talk to them. We didn't speak the language, but they were all friendly. They were sitting there watching us, and when we finally got the vehicle running, started, they all stood up and gave a big cheer.
Oh,
I
wow.
said, Jeff, I think we come to the right place. I mean, the people were so friendly. And then we finally got to Lowbury. We drove into Lowbury. It's a good-sized town, military town. And we decided to eat because we went into this restaurant. And you know, we went in and sat down. And then at the next table was a group of young lieutenants in the Thai Army. So one of them came over and said, "Why don't you sit over here with us?" in English. And he said, "We will help you order." So we went over and sat and had a great time, talked, laughed, had fun. And it was so friendly everywhere we went. And then from there we drove on up to this old camp. And there wasn't anything there. This old building, 3 old buildings that had been built by the Japanese. And but they had 2 of these big water tanks where they caught rainwater off of the roof. So we could take a bath there, you know, just get water and put it in a bucket. And there was about 20 laborers that they had hired to get it ready, you know, cut the grass and weeds and do some stuff to get it ready. And the laborers were all standing there watching us, you know. But they were all friendly. So I remember Jeff was this real big, heavy-set guy with red hair and freckles all over him, and very white. So when he got ready to take his bath, he just ripped off his clothes. And those Thai guys all laughed, but they roared with laughter because they had never seen anything, because the Thai men would never go naked in front of anybody. You always had to, you know, you had to be, I mean, that's just the way they were, you know, they would not. So, you know, like the women and all, when they took a lot of the people who lived along the rivers and all took their baths in the river, but they always used this like a sarong. So they never were in the nude. And when Jeff just ripped off, they all roared with laughter. But it was all fun, you know, good, very friendly. And then we had some of our stuff with us, and we slept in that. And the 3 buildings had been built by the Japanese military during World War II, but they had never used them after the war. So they were 2-story buildings. The bottom floor was open. The top had some rooms in it, but a big room in the middle. And what we were supposed to do is get ready for a training class. So these guys cleaned up everything, and then we decided we had to have a kitchen, so we hired a contractor. And also we needed to put up the equipment to teach parachute training.
Okay, now you said you were setting all this up for training. What was it you were supposed to be training, or who was it you were supposed
Well,
to?
I didn't really know yet. They hadn't actually told us.
You just knew you were going to be doing some training there,
Yeah.
and then to
And
get
so
it ready.
we got it all ready for everything. We built those, you know, we built the towers. We tried to build them just like they had at Fort Benning. You know, where you jump out and when you jump out, it's a parachute harness, and you go down this cable. So it simulates very well a parachute jump. And so we found out this guy who was a builder, this old Chinese guy. And we would draw pictures and talk to him. The language was a problem in a lot of cases about what we wanted. And I remember he had these long whiskers growing out of a big wart on his chin. And he'd stroke that and study when you tell him what we need. And he would say, okay, tomorrow. And so we called him Mr. Tomorrow. But he always came through. He was and he built, when we ended up with those towers, it looked just like Fort Benning. We got it all. This guy was really good at all that stuff. And so then we got the first class to train. And
what was your first class?
It was 50 young Thai police who had just been recruited into the police department, privates. That was our first class.
All right, did you know this was the border police? Or wasn't the border police yet?
No, I don't think it was the border police. They called it the border police. It was just police department.
So didn't you wonder why a CIA agent is in Thailand training their policemen?
No, because we were training them in the right thing. And you know, it was obvious. It's better than anything else because the police are all over the country. And not the Army has a camp here and a camp there, but you got police everywhere. So they were obviously the best guys, in my opinion, to work with. Because wherever you went, you were going to find the police. And the police had one organization that covered all of Thailand. But then you had, within that you had the provincial police, and you had the city police in Bangkok, the traffic police. But we worked with the border police. They called it the border police. They were supposed to, in fact, we helped train the first of the border police, really. Because the borders were all open borders. Anybody could walk across it. So, you know, as time went on, you had to realize that anybody could come across the border. So you had to prepare for that. And so we ended up working with the border police. And so then when we went to Laos, that was not the Thai Army who went with us, it was the border police. Well, that's where we had trained the organization.
How long did you work in Thailand training the police? 10 years?
Yeah. I spent, but we actually formed a unit, and we did many things in that 10 years.
Like
But what you basically were doing were getting ready to go to Laos.
Did you realize at the time that that's what you were doing?
Yeah, I didn't know, I knew it was going to come somewhere, because the communists had already made up their mind to take over that area. The Chinese communists and the Vietnamese wanted to become the dominant, in fact they were fighting each other to become the dominant power in Southeast Asia. And you knew that was coming.
So when you were actually training these Thai police, you knew it was to prepare them for war of some sort against the communists, whether it would be, you didn't know whether it would be Thailand or Laos. So.
Well, and the main thing, because that's why the police were good, is to work with the locals, because you couldn't have done it with just those guys. But if you looked, I had studied Thailand after I got there a great deal, and some before I went, is that the whole border areas were not really policed at all. And you could walk across the border almost anywhere into the next country. And therefore you had to find some way to police those borders. Well, I figured the best way is to become acquainted with the people who live along the border. So then when I got the okay we had those first guys that we were training, but then I wanted to build this unit up, and General Powell, he agreed with me that we could recruit additional people. So then what I did is he gave me permission, which was extremely unusual, because normally they would recruit the people in the Bangkok area. They might come from out in the country, but they go join the police there and be assigned to other places. But I wanted to go and recruit directly from the villages located along the border. So you could get young men and any place that had a high school. So you could get them with a high school education, and if possible, who spoke the language of whatever they spoke across the border from them in that area. Right? And so the best place to do is to recruit from that area. And General Powell gave me the permission to do it. At that time, we already had a C-47 that I think we were limited to like 40 hours a month on the C-47 to fly anywhere you want. So what we would do is we already had the people that had trained in Lowbury. I think it was a total of maybe at least 100, maybe a little over 100. And so what we would do is we would drop a team on the border near a town that had a high school. But right on, because I liked the border, because usually the people who lived along the border in Thailand could speak the language of whoever was right across the border. You know, because it's right there. So what we'd do is we'd fly over a town that we picked, and we would drop leaflets and said on a certain date, this team will parachute in here, and they want to talk to the young men with a high school education between certain ages. And you know, then when you would drop them, I mean, there would be people coming out of the woodwork. I mean, a lot of them were people that you didn't really want to recruit. They didn't have what you wanted, but you would find the guys who had a high school education, and then what we would do is we had the authority. We would, or say from an area where we dropped, maybe we'd pick up 10 guys, maybe less. And what we would do is once they agreed to join, we would give them train and bus tickets to get to Hue Hin, you know, where our headquarters had become. And they would show up, and we'd put them in the training. And it was extremely successful because you got, almost all of them could speak the language of whoever was across the border, right?
Right now, so you're talking, this is different training than the Thai police training? Now are you talking?
Oh no, this was still the para. We were training these guys to be in the police.
Oh.
But
and
we were
who would
forming
pay their salaries?
the Thai government.
The Thai government, and they would be paid as a Thai policeman?
Yeah.
And you're calling them Peru? And what does that stand for?
Well, eventually we got that name. I got that. It was my name. It was called because in Thailand you had the police and the army was very jealous of the police getting any authority that might overlap with the army. It was an internal problem. So I wanted to make sure I picked a name that did not sound like the army.
Oh. So what?
So we named it what was it called? The Police Parachute Reinforcement Unit. And what it was supposed to be, the name came from the fact that if something occurred,
police aerial
reinforcement unit, but you could drop supplies or you could drop other police to help out in a situation that occurred along the border.
So when you were recruiting these young men, and by dropping the leaflets, and then would you yourself go talk to them?
Oh, yeah, well, in some cases I would, or the other case, we already had the guys that were really good. Anyway, they were better. So in many cases, they would just talk to them.
And these would be Thai policemen that you had already trained?
Yeah, the people that we'd already trained. They were already in the organization.
And so they would talk to them and recruit them, and then would they be the ones to select the ones, because you obviously didn't want to take everybody?
Oh yeah, no, they would pick them out of whoever they talked to. They would decide this is the guys we want, and then they would give them a ticket on buses and trains to get to Hue Hin.
Now why were they going to Hue Hin and not Laos?
That was our headquarters. No, we'd already moved to Waihen from
Oh,
Loperi.
from Loperi?
Yeah.
Okay, when did you move from there? Like, how many classes were trained first at Loperi?
Well, I don't remember the number. We'd been there about a year.
Oh, you had been, and why did you decide you had to move from there?
Because the area we were in up there actually belonged to the Thai Army.
Oh,
The Thai Army didn't like us anyway because they thought we were trying to look too much like the Army. And so General Powell told me that we must move out because the Army wants that area. So he asked me, where do you think we should be located? And I'd already been to Waihen and I had seen this place across the river, across the road from the Thai King's summer palace. And there was a little camp already there. And you'd have to build onto it, but I figured so I asked General Powell if we could get that camp. Because I wanted to be across the street from the King summer palace, because the king was young, and they spent a lot of time down there. And I figured if we lived right across the street, we could become acquainted with the king. And because the politics in Thailand was extremely turbulent. Sooner or later, you're going to have problems. And I thought if you're right there across the street from the king's summer palace, you may be able to get some help from the king in troubled situations.
now, did you have to go and build those jump towers and all that stuff at the new base?
Yeah.
So you did that and
And we did it at a very low price because we used our own Faroe people to do a lot of the work. And then we hired some local laborers. So I tried to keep the costs very low. And then because you have to, it takes a lot. We had to put up we call a packing shed. That's where when you jump with the parachute, then you have to repack it. And the packers have to be good. Because, if you don't pack it right, the damn thing's not going to open. And that could be embarrassing,
not to mention fatal.
So we had, this guy came from, he worked for the CIA, but he was Mr. Parachute in the CIA. He trained everybody about anything to do with parachutes.
Who was it, Jim?
What the hell was his name? He's dead now. I should remember. But then he came out and set up the first training class where we trained the people to pack the... I think he came when we made the first parachute jumps, too. Because I think the first day, him and one of the other Americans jumped out of the airplane first. And, but he trained the packers. We'd already designated this group of Thais who would be the packers, who would be the packers. And he visited several times after that to see how they were doing. And he said, I would trust those guys packing the chutes better than anybody else I've ever known in the world. They are really good. They're extremely careful, and that's what they became, the parachute packers. And we had a big packing shed where we packed the parachutes. We never had any problem that was traceable to a malfunction of the parachute itself. These parachutes are pretty reliable. And then the other thing we did is we made the packers, they had to jump their own parachutes they had packed themselves.
Well, that would make them want to do it right.
That's right.
What other things did you train the Peru, these police, these Thai border police, besides parachute jumping?
Oh, we train them in how to use every kind of weapon, military tactics, and then the big thing is how to walk in the jungle, how to operate in the back country, and be ready to fight whoever you needed to fight. So we opened a jungle training camp.
At the same place?
No, the jungle training camp was in the jungle. You had to walk.
So you actually took them out into the jungle?
No, they walked out into the, I mean, they had to leave, and it took a week to walk to the jungle training camp. Okay, then we dropped some supplies at the jungle training camp. Food and other stuff that they might need, and we built, and they built, the ones that were already there built temporary shelters that they could use during the rainy season. And then we'd take them there. Once they had finished their basic training, then we'd take them to the jungle to do the jungle training, and that'd take quite a while. So they learned. The big thing is to teach them not to be afraid of the jungle, because that's the big problem. You know, most Thais came from the cities, were actually afraid of the jungle. You know, whether they could survive or not. But the truth is, if you use the jungle right, it becomes your best friend, because you can find your food there, and the big thing is you can always get away from your enemy, because you have a trail, right? Wherever you walk, you've got to use trails, because it's all underbrush and all that stuff. You can't. So if somebody shoots after you, you take one step right or left, and as far as they're concerned, you're lost in the jungle. You know, you disappear. So survival is very easy. All you got to do is get off of the trail, and they can't find you either. So the jungle becomes your friend. Well, you know, a book that I read that had a great influence on me of how to utilize the jungle was written by a British guy who in World War II, he had been in Malaysia when it all started. And I can't remember all of the circumstances, but what he did is he got left behind in the jungles of Malaysia.
By accident?
No, because the British surrendered. The British surrendered to the Japanese in Malaysia. But he didn't surrender, he just
hid out.
Walked off in the jungle. But then he lived for a long time all by himself in the jungle. And he would go around, he figured out if the villages were friendly or not. He'd go to the villagers, and in a lot of cases they would give him food, but he learned that there's plenty of food right in the jungle. Stuff you can eat off the trees, small animals you can kill and eat. There's food everywhere. What was the name of that book? I think I probably got a copy of it. It's called, but it basically was the fact that the jungle can be your friend or it can be your enemy. If it's your enemy, you're not going to survive. If it's your friend, you can survive. Very good book. And it taught me a lot about how to train my people.
Now, had you actually gone out, how did you find this jungle site? Did you go and scope it out and pick this site yourself?
Yeah, sure. But you know, you look, okay, I flew over areas in an airplane. And you know, at that time, Thailand, there was jungle everywhere.
Yeah, so how do you decide, well, okay, this is the spot?
Well, I just I would decide, I decided this place looked good, so I had a lot of freedom. I could do whatever I wanted to. So I would pick out the place. And once we had the parachute training, and then we had our jungle training camp. So we'd go once you finish parachute training and all, and the weapons training, then they would walk to the jungle training camp, which took a week, and then they would probably stay there 2 or 3 months.
Oh.
And it was really in the jungle. Okay, then when you came out of that, you're ready to go anywhere. And then to continue training, what I would do, I flew all over the country by that plane, right? So, and in those early days, I'm sure that at least 85% of Thailand was jungle. You know, because the population, when I went to Thailand, the population was only 18 million. You know, now it's what, hundreds of millions. There's people everywhere. And then there wasn't. Most of the jungle areas did not have people in it. They had maybe some wild people in there, but not much. So it was all just jungle, and it was all animals of every kind. Tigers, elephants, anything you wanted to name. It was just wonderful, I thought. Wonderful place. And but and these boys that you trained, almost all of them came from the towns. So they didn't know much about the jungle themselves. So but they learned very fast. They were easy to train. And once you trained them, if you're walking down a jungle trail, it's heavy brush, everything on either side. All you got to do is take 3 or 4 steps right or left, and you're lost in the jungle to anybody who's trying to find you. So the jungle
on the same note, though, if you take 3 or 4 steps in the wrong way, you're lost.
No, if you've been trained correctly, you got a compass, you're never lost. I mean, you know from the beginning where you are and where is the place you're trying to get to, and the compass will tell you what direction to go to. So just don't get afraid. You can do it. And that's what we did, is we made her spend a lot of time walking in the jungle until and you look, there's animals and stuff everywhere. You'll never starve. You can find plenty of food. You know, it's all there.
Well, that must have been a pretty exciting experience for these young Thais from the city.
Oh yeah, sure.
And after all this extensive training, what would they do then as a police officer? Because now they're part of the police force.
Yeah, but they're not a part of the regular police force. They're part of this unit who is being trained to operate in the jungle and to work with. If you went all over Thailand, the people in the back country along the borders, they never saw the police department.
Oh.
Nobody came there. They were at the mercy of all these different people who might be against them. So if they saw, so what you needed to do is to go into those backcountry areas and train them how to use weapons, give them some weapons to protect the village and themselves. And then from that point on, they were your friends. They would work.
So where would these trained boys go afterwards?
Back to their village, yeah.
Back to their villages, and then they would protect their own villages?
Yeah. But if you had a problem along the border in their area, you could go straight to them and get guides, people to help you. It gave so no matter where you went, you knew somebody there. And you knew somebody you could trust. And this all worked. And eventually we had it all along the Lao border. So when the problems started in Laos, we already had people up there who knew exactly what's going on in Laos, who was who. They knew who Vang Pao was, who the Hmong were. And the fact that they believed that the Hmong would probably fight the communists because they would hate the communists. Because the Hmong wanted to be free, big thing. They didn't want anybody to bother them. They didn't want a central government, anything like that would bother them. And you knew that they would never get along with the communists because they're opposite. Everything they do is opposite from what the communists do. So they're the ideal guys. You know they're going to, if you offer them an opportunity to be able to protect their home village, their family, they're going to be your friend.
Who did you use for instructors? Obviously, you couldn't be out there doing all the instruction for all these men you were training. Who were the instructors?
No, the Thais that we had trained at Lobrig, we had those 35 guys, and they were all capable of being instructors. They knew everything.
So it was 35 men?
Yeah.
About that? And they were all Thai?
Yeah.
And who paid these guys?
They were all paid by the police department.
Now, during that time, where did you live? You were living in Thailand in what?
I lived in Hue. In fact, until I got married, I lived right in the camp.
I was gonna say, okay, you weren't married at that time, so it was
No.
just you. So this is basically it. Who did you answer to? Anybody? Who was your
Yeah,
immediate boss?
the chief of station in Bangkok, the chief of the CIA station. But, you know, for the most part, they ignored me. And I liked it. Because then I could do whatever I wanted to. All I had to do is turn in a monthly report, you know, write down what I had been doing. And for most of the time, they never said anything. There was no response from that monthly report.
What were you actually considered? Was that a case officer?
Oh yeah, I was a regular case officer, employee of the CIA, and we got a certain amount of monetary support from the CIA. We had that. We could use what was it, like 30 hours a month or something, 30 or 40 hours a month on that C-47, which was flown by CAT.
Mm-hmm.
And they paid for the food in the camp there. I paid for that. I had a fund, but you know it wasn't expensive at all. We hired women to do the cooking. First, when Walter and them were still the CIA actually owned or partially owned this restaurant in Thailand. Why? I don't have any idea, but it's the best Western restaurant in Bangkok. Terrific place. And so what we did is we hired cooks from that restaurant to find other good cooks. And they'd go to, and then they could come to us in Hue and train some women who worked there. And they really, I mean, the best food in the world. I mean, they were just terrific. They could cook anything. You'd be absolutely amazed at what and they knew, a lot of these guys had worked in other restaurants, so every once in a while on a big holiday we'd have, what do they call this? The dessert would be this ice cream that you set on fire. What do you call it?
Oh, I know what you're talking about. I forget. Yeah.
I mean, we had some really sophisticated stuff.
Oh, so you ate well then?
Well, you know, I normally in Hue we ate just regular Thai food, but when we wanted, we could lay it on. They all knew how to cook it.
All right. How many men would you say you trained for the Peru? Started with that one first class of 50 men.
Well, a lot of them, though, that we trained went back to their units. They didn't stay with us. We only picked certain ones that we thought were the best people.
Okay,
So we eventually built up a...
Oh, so what percent? 90% went back to their own villages to protect their own villages?
Or whatever job they went to in the police department. They came out of the police. And we would
say
keep...
that's 90%?
Probably.
And so...
But we would pick a few guys that would stay, and we built up... So we eventually built up an organization of probably 250 men that were the old, really well trained. They knew everything, they could do anything. So when Laos came along, and once we had found Bang Pao and met Bang Pao and decided what to do, you know, I asked him when I first met him, and he said what he, you know, and out of this meeting came the fact that he really hated the communists and he wanted to fight with the communists if they could get their support, right? So...
Bill, back up for a minute. Okay, so you were doing this from like 1950 to 1960. When did you meet General Bang Pao? Was that like 1960?
No, much later. Let me think. whenever the war in Laos came along, whenever
So,
it
all
got
right,
started.
when you and the United States saw the war in Laos, communists coming into Laos,
Well, yeah, I really saw, but what I did long before this all started there, I already had teams along the Thai border, the Thai-Lao border, right? Okay, what happens when you have these people along and you leave them there for a long time? They get acquainted with the people on the other side of the river. And what you find out is that the people on both sides of the river are exactly the same people. They're families. The ones who live on this side got relatives on the other side. So then you begin to find out at a working people level what's going on in Laos. And we knew more about what was going on than the U.S. Embassy did in Vientiane. Because we were talking to the real country people. Now they knew what the politicians were doing, but that's not what's really important when you get down to a war like you had in Laos, is what the ordinary people are thinking and what they're willing to do, if you can really depend on them or not.
so then you were hearing back from your teams along the border about the communists coming down into Laos.
Well, and they all knew that Bang Pao was probably the one leader who would probably resist the communists.
Okay, so General Vang Pao was he was the leading Hmong at the time.
Well, but what he was, I think when I first went up there, he was a sergeant in the old French army.
Oh, so he worked for the French?
Yeah, because the French owned Laos.
And you had heard of him, and you
Yeah,
decided you wanted to meet him, or he decided he wanted to meet you?
No, I heard him from all these people along the border and so forth, and then I made a trip up to Laos and talked to the embassy people and all that, a good ways back there, but I didn't. And some of them knew quite a bit about Laos. They had traveled, and a couple of them knew Vang Pao, because he was actually in the French army. And but I didn't learn too much that I thought was really useful, except I figured myself that if something came along, the best thing we could probably do is to get people into Laos to start working with the Hmong first, because the Hmong would be the ones who would be the natural resistance to whatever the communists were trying to do. Because the Hmong they lived on top of the mountains. Now, it's true, most of them could not read and write, but they were smart, very intelligent, and I believed 100% that they would not get along with the communists, because the Hmong were free people. They wanted to be free. They didn't want anybody to bother them. They wanted to live they lived on top of their mountain, and they looked down on everybody else. And if you live up there and you look down on the people below you, you begin to believe you're better than they are. You're superior. You go to any big mountain country and look in the history, they all feel superior to the lowlander, because you're up there looking down on everybody. Sounds strange, but it's true. But you look all over the world, the mountain people have always been fighters. Everywhere. Because they look down the hill at all these people and they believe they're all inferior to them.
So you decided to track down Vang Pao and talk to him. How did you know where to find him?
I didn't know where to find him at first, but what happened, okay, then the war began to heat up over there. Okay, when it started heating up, and the first thing that happened is that, okay, the leader in Laos on the non-communist side was General Phumi.
Phumi?
Yeah, Phumi Nasawan. And he was a general in the Lao Army and was the commander of the Lao Army, and a few other things. And then you had this little revolution in Laos where this Captain Kong Lee, he was the leader of the the Lao Parachute Battalion, which is supposed to be the best military organization in Laos. But the truth is that Kong Lee was an uneducated guy who wasn't really too smart at all. But he had built up this parachute unit that were very loyal to him, and it gave him a certain amount of power because he could actually control Vientiane easily. So he got angry about how things were going. I don't know exactly what brought on everything, but they had a big meeting in Nong Prabang where they all went up, the big leaders all went up to meet the king, right? So Pumi, who was supposed to be the leader, the prime minister, head of the army, he was in Nong Prabang, and that's when Kong Lee declared that he was taking over Laos. And so these, like Pumi was up there in Nong Prabang, but he had a C-47 with him. So then he flew. He didn't go back to. They thought he'd come into Vientiane and they'd arrest him, right? But he flew straight to Savannakhet, and Savannakhet was not agreeing with what was going on in Vientiane really. And I think Pumi was originally from there.
Savannakhet?
Yeah, and you had some of the Lao army down there. I think they said they had 5 battalions or something. So when he left Nong Prabang, he didn't land in Vientiane where Kong Lee was waiting to arrest him. So he flew to Savannakhet. And that's when, I mean, I was working in Thailand and all, but when the Lao War started, I remember I was flying in the C-47. We were dropping to our teams along the Burmese border, but then I always listened to the radio. The radio guy let me listen to BBC on the radio on the plane. And the radio, it said that there had been a revolution in Laos, that Kong Lee had taken over, and you know exactly what's going to happen. So I figured it's time for me to get my nose in this somewhere. So we were supposed to be flying back to Hue Hin. We'd made those drops. So I told him, let's go directly into Bangkok. I want to get out in Bangkok. We went to the embassy. And you know, the embassy didn't know a hell of a lot about what was going on. But I went over there and I hung around for several days. And there was traffic going from, Vientiane was you had the regular Lao station. And of course you could read the traffic from all those places that was going to Washington. And you could tell that nobody in Washington or Vientiane or Bangkok knew what the hell to do. They were all in a dither about everything. But I stayed there to listen to all of this so I would know what's going on. But, because I didn't believe that anybody else knew what was going on. And I probably knew more than any of them. But anyway, I knew some way this is the time for me to get my tent under the nose in Laos. I mean, my nose under the tent. So I went in there every day and read all the traffic and listened to this and that. And the chief of station in Bangkok and the chief of station in Vientiane and headquarters were all fighting each other. They were sending nasty messages back and forth. But they finally said that General Pumi, who was in Savannakhet, had 5 battalions there, right? But they said now the money that belongs to the Lao government is all in the banks in Bangkok because they can't trust any bank in Vientiane. So they said we need to make the money available so Pumi can pay the salaries of those 5 battalions, or they won't have anybody left. If the men don't make any money, they can't support their family, and they'll go home. So they said we better send money to Pumi to pay the troops, because I mean the bank, it was under control of the Lao government, but they weren't in Bangkok, and but they said they could get the money out of the bank, You know, they knew everybody in the banking business in Bangkok. So when I heard all this, I immediately volunteered to take the money up and give it to Pumi and Samaniket. You know, I didn't know him personally. I wanted to talk to him, and I knew if you arrive with a bag full of money, you're going to be welcome. I don't give a damn who you are. And so they agreed, and they sent this little plane down from Helio Courier, and Ron Sutton was the pilot, and we flew up. I'd never met him, or I'd never flown in the plane before, and he showed me the characteristics and capabilities of that airplane all the way back. We're flying along up in the clouds, and he was telling me what a great plane this was, that it could do all this different stuff. I said, well, what the hell would you do now? Like, we're up in the mountains, we're up in the clouds. What would you do if the engine quit right now? He switched off the engine and said, I'll show you. And so then you could slow it way down. And so we were coming down real slowly. So he said when we got down, we could see trees. All right, now he said, I'll start her up and we'll get out of this. But if this was going to crash, I could sit this right in the top of that tree. And I guarantee you we'd both walk away from it.
Now, what aircraft was that?
Helio Courier. Oh, that was a great airplane for that time. And it could land on unbelievably short fields, and you wouldn't believe the places that
Well,
plane could
was it
land.
more of an airplane or a helicopter?
No, it was an airplane. It had a wing. But it had slats in the front. When you slowed it down to under like 35, these slats, you could put down the flaps in the back, big flaps, and then these slats would come out of the front automatic because they were held in by the air pressure, and so then you could really go slow. In fact, I saw one day Sutpin, who was the best of the pilots with the Helio, he actually flew the Helio at the airport where he flew through the hangar, you know. You got about 4 feet above you and 4 feet below you, but he slowed it way down and just went right through the hangar. So so anyway, we flew up there and we landed on the football field beside the Army headquarters and met Pumi, and I gave him the money. And then I asked him, what are you going to do? Oh, he said, I've got 5 battalions here, and what I have to go back and take Vientiane and get Kong Lee out of there. I've got to take, that's the first step. And so we must fight the communists. And I mean, that's what I gave him the money, and that's what I wanted to find out. So then I could go back and tell him that Pumi said that he was going to take these 5 battalions, and he's going up and attack and take Vientiane back from Kong Lee's force.
And
right?
did he?
Yeah, he did. But when I sent off that message, then they wanted me, and what I suggested is that they let me send the airplane to Hua Hin and bring some of the Peru personnel in, into Savannakhet. And then that we would all, I think I had 5 teams. I wanted to put a 3-man team with each of Pumi's battalions, and they had radio, everything. Because Pumi told me he had no communications, very poor medical, and we had a medical technician and radio operators in that team. So
did you insert all those Peru guys into?
Yeah, and they just went out with the battalion. One of them went with each battalion. So okay, it gave them a guy with a very good medical technician, and he gave them radio communication, which they didn't have any of that. So they were very welcome. So then those 5 battalions went up and retook Vientiane. And in the process, they shelled the U.S. Embassy and all of that. Didn't kill anybody or anything, but when they'd finally taken Vientiane, and then I was still in Savannakhet, and then we I flew up with the Peru team I had there. We flew to Vientiane. And I went in and talked to the chief of station. And his name was Jorgensen, the best chief of station I ever worked for. I mean, absolutely no question. So I went in and talked to him, and he told me what he thought a great job we had done getting there in the first place. And so I stayed in Vientiane, and that's when we eventually decided to support Wang Pao, but we had to find him. Didn't know where he was. And so the pilot who had flown me up there to Sutphin, it's Ron Sutphin, who had flown me into Savannah-Cat, what I did is I hung around the airport every day trying to talk to pilots or anybody else who knew anything about what's going on in the country, trying to find out where Wang Pao was. So eventually Sutphin came in, he'd been up country, and he said, "Oh, I saw Wang Pao today." And he said he's located, and he showed me on the map where he was. He said there's a little, they knocked out a little bit of an airstrip where a helio courier could land. Not a good one, but they could land there. And he showed me on the map where it was. So then the next morning, these 5 green helicopters were sitting at the airport, and they had no markings on them. But the guys who were obviously the pilots of them were hanging around those choppers, and they were Americans. So I started talking to them, and they said, yeah, they'd just flown them off a carrier, and that they were going to become Air America planes. But these guys were all from the Navy, and they had all already resigned from the Navy completely, and they were going to be hired by Air America to fly those helicopters. So, then I figured that's my way to, if I can find out where Wang Pao is, then I'll get one of those helicopters and I'll fly up there. So eventually Sutphin came in and I talked to him, and he showed me exactly where he saw Wang Pao. And it was they had a little strip there that had been just knocked out of the jungle, and and so I looked, I knew I could find it all right. So when I decided to go, and I went down there and told them what I was going to do, they said, how the hell can you find it? I said, I'll find it. So I went over and talked to the pilot of the helicopter. And I told him, oh, I wanted to go up there. And he said, oh, I can't go anywhere. He said, I don't have any maps. They have no navigational aids here, whatever. I can't fly up there anywhere. I can't do it. I said, look, son, don't worry. I know this place like the back of my head. I've never been there either, I said, I know this area. You don't have to worry. I've been here for years. So.
And he believed you.
And he believed me, but I knew I could find it, because all you had to do is to fly down the Mekong River to Pak San, and the Pak River then ran directly up to where Wang Pao was located. Small river, but if you flew down to Pak San, fly up the river, it's going to be right there. That's where it is. So
he took you.
That's the first time I went. I think one of those helicopters. So what we did is I told him just fly down the river and then go up that other river. So when we finally got there, I had General Purnett and the Peru team were in the helicopter with me. And, they were absolutely fearless. Purnett, the best friend I ever had in my life. And so when we got up there, we didn't see anybody. There was one Hmong guy standing at that little place where the helio had landed, but we landed there in the chopper. And I got out of the helicopter, and Purnett and I ran over and talked to this, because Purnett could speak all those kind of languages, because he'd grown up in North Thailand, and they all had the same language. So we went over And when I went up and talked to them, they said, yeah, the bank pilot's here somewhere around here. But it's getting dark, and the pilot was screaming to get out of there. So I went back and asked Burnett, are you and the team willing to stay? You know, they had no idea who was there. They'd never met anybody there. Oh, and Burnett said, no, no sweat, yeah.
What's his name, Pranett?
Burnett.
Spell it.
P-R-A-N-E-T.
And what was his position?
He was the actual commander of Peru.
And you guys were actually good friends?
Oh, yeah, we'd been friends. He had come through the training in Lowbury.
Was he a Thai?
He was a Thai
In the
lieutenant
beginning?
at that time. He was in the, I guess in the border police, but way down south. But he loved the idea of guerrilla warfare. We talked about it all the time when he was, we became very good friends when he was there. And he told me that when the Japanese landed, he was already in the police department. And he said when the Japanese came off of Bangkok, and the Thais were, a lot of the Thais were thinking that they ought to fight the Japanese and don't let them come ashore. So he said that what they did then is he was in the officers' academy, very young, so they called them all out and gave them weapons. And they were going to go out and fight the Japanese when they came ashore. But then he said at the last minute, somebody in the government decided it would be foolish to try to fight the Japanese, because, you know, they had better weapons, better everything, so they should surrender. So he said when they told us to turn in our guns and go back to the barracks, he said, I cried. He said, but he said, if I knew what I'd learned here about guerrilla warfare, I would have gone into the jungle and built my own army. And he would have. And so...
All right, so back up on the mountain. So you asked Burnett and his team if they
yeah,
would
I'm just
stay?
telling you his back so you'll know what kind of guy he was.
Yeah.
So I asked them, are you willing to stay here? Oh, sure, no sweat. He didn't know anybody there, but they knew they could take care of themselves. We had trained them that. All you got to do is, if you take 3 steps in the jungle and you're out of sight of everybody, and you can take care of yourself. So he stayed up there, and then the next morning, they had the radio and all. It's the old dit-da-dit-dot-dot-dot. So they sent me a message saying, Bill, no, and it said, Bill, come back as soon as you can. It's the guy we've been looking for. So then I went back up, and that's when I met.
The very next day?
I think it was the next day. And that's when I met BP the first time. But Burnett had talked to him almost all night.
Oh, he had?
So they knew everything, you know, what we were trying to do. And so we got up there, and Burnett, General Wang Pao reiterated the fact that they had to fight the communists. He said, we can't, I know the communists. They've been around in Vietnam for a long time. I've met them over there. He said, we cannot live with the communists. No way we can live with them. So he said, we either got to fight them or we'll just run away to Thailand. Because, you know, if you went across the border at that time, on the Thai side, it was just all jungle and mountains. They could have gone over there, but anyway, that's what he said. And then he went on.
So what did you propose to him at that
I
time?
didn't propose anything, but he said to me, if you will give us the weapons, we will fight the communists. And all I could say was, I didn't know. I said, you know, I'll have to get in touch and talk to the American side and see what they'll do, because I had no idea what they would do. I didn't know. So then I flew back to Vientiane, and I went to the embassy, and they said, Mr. Jorgensen wants you to come to his house for dinner. He was the chief of station. I didn't realize that this high-level CIA guy had come in that day. And his name was Desmond Fitzgerald. He was the head of the CIA, and he'd been in OSS and all that. Good, a really good guy. I really liked him. But he was one of those big Northeast, went to Harvard and all that crap. And but he was an awfully good guy, I thought, and he supported me forever. So anyway, I went to Georgie's house, and they were and we talked. And I just told him what had happened, what I'd done all day, and what I thought. They never said a word. I talked until I'd said everything I could think of. Then I went back to where I was staying, but when I left there, they said, "Come on into the embassy tomorrow morning." So in the morning, I went to the embassy, and then they came over, and Fitzgerald, who was the director, he came over and talked to me, and he said, "Bill, I was very much impressed with what you said last night, and I've been thinking about it." And he said, "I'm going to send," and he showed me then this message. It was about what did I say? It was like 16 or 17 page radio message in which he had said all the things that I had said that night. And he made it a strong recommendation that they support the Hmong. And he said, "That's gone off to Washington." He said, "I'm leaving here today, but I've got to go to Vietnam. But whenever it comes back, I'll get the message there." And he recommended that we support Bang Pao. And they came almost right back with a message telling me that they were willing to arm the first 1,000 men. That they just said 1,000. First 1,000 men, we will arm them. And so that, I mean, that was the nose under the tent, you know.
So did you go back up to Vang Pao to tell them that yes, they would arm the first 1,000? How did you get that information to him?
No, because I left Burnett and the Peru team with him, and they had the radio. We had excellent, secure communications. So I sent him a message saying that I think we were going to have success in supporting the Hmong in this whole thing. And I told him, I'll be back up. I'm making arrangements. So, and then they were attacked during the night by some communist element. So they took off walking, and they were walking up to another place. It was a place that Bang Pao had recommended then, that if we're going to start dropping and arming the people, that would be the first place. Because I told them we need to find a place where we can at least have time to train, if we drop the weapons, to train the men with the weapons.
Now, it was going to be your job, or the CIA's job, to train them how to use these weapons?
It was going to be my job, with my Peru people. I mean, these guys could do anything. And, you know, we could bring in more people if we wanted to, or whatever. There's no question in my mind that we could, all they had to do is say, okay, we're going to drop the weapons. And we wanted, and I told them then when they said they would drop the weapons, that we wanted to drop them with ammunition and everything you would need, and we'd train them, and they could immediately go into action. So I just asked Bang Pao, where is one place that when we drop those weapons, we can have a few days to train the people? "Oh yes, I know the perfect place," he said. So he said, "It's over there." And so I said, "How much time have we got from the time we drop the weapons till the enemy's going to be coming up to us?" And he said, "About 3 days." So, you know, I know that if it had been most American military people or anybody else, they would have said, "You can't train anybody in 3 days," something like that. But I said to Burnett, I said, "Okay, let's sit down and come up with the 3-day training program." Because you can. And especially with the Hmong, everybody they had old flintlocks and stuff like that. They'd all hunted. So they had crossbows. And the crossbow shoots like a gun. So they weren't going to need a lot of training. And they knew they could walk in the mountains like nobody else could. That was their big advantage. So you didn't have to give them a really complicated training program.
What kind of weapons were dropped that they had to get trained in?
It was the old World War II rifle, the same one I'd used in
What, the M1 Garand?
M1 rifles. And we had some submachine guns and stuff like that. But what it was packaged that the outfit had in Okinawa. I didn't know all this before. They had a supply base there where they had this stuff all set up in packages. So if you sent them a message, they could, within a day, they could be dropping the stuff somewhere. They had it all set up there. And eventually they sent me up there just to look at what they had
In Okinawa?
in Okinawa.
So, how many people did you train with the first drop?
Oh, I think the very first was 300.
You trained 300 guys in 3 days?
Yeah, we gave them the 3-day training, but and just the day we finished, the next morning, they reported that the enemy was coming up the trail. They were almost there already. They were coming up to where we were.
So Von Paul was right. It would take them 3 days before
it's about right. So immediately these guys went out. They were the happiest people I was. They were just jumping around.
So you were actually there?
Oh, I was there.
Did you, for that first training, did you stay there the entire 3 days?
Yeah, I didn't go with them when they went out to ambush.
No.
But I was up there. So then when they came back, I'd never seen, they were so happy because they'd been, but if you're teaching guerrillas, what you need the first operation to be very easy, successful, and don't lose very many people, right? That's what you need. And that's what we had.
Well, that was quite a graduation day for those guys then.
Right. And it gave them all kind of confidence.
All right, so those first 300 guys, how did it work from then on? Those 300
well,
guys?
no, what we did is we started, I had permission to arm 1,000 men at first, right?
Yeah.
So what we did is we had sent Peru teams to the areas we picked out to train that number of people, and then we just dropped the weapons in, and they did. This all happened within 3 or 4 days. We had 1,000 men armed right in the areas under the North Vietnamese nose. So when the North Vietnamese tried to go attack anybody, they found them all with guns, and they were shooting back from the top of the mountain.
How quickly were you able to get the first 1,000 trained? Are we talking days
I told you it was a 3-day
weeks?
training. 3-day training. That's what we were doing because we believed that once you dropped the weapons, the enemy was probably going to show up within 3 days.
So probably within 2 weeks' time, you
Oh
had
yeah,
all
we
of them?
trained on, but because we kept the training very simple. All we trained was how to use their weapon that they had, right? And the next is to train them in how to set up an ambush. Because an ambush is simple, effective. You just hide in the bush, the enemy comes along and you shoot them.
Okay, so was the plan, once these men, the monks, were armed and trained, were they going to be on their own to fight the communists, or were they going to have CIA help?
Well, no, we would drop stuff to them if they needed, and in any case, I could send Peru teams to give them additional training, because we had the Peru teams available. And then, but the goal was then to take that whole area and arm enough. We had permission to arm 1,000 men first, so we wanted to get that done as soon as possible. So by the time the communists woke up to what was going on, we already had men trained with guns sitting on the top of each mountain. So they didn't have the area, and then they agreed right away to to go on up to, I think, a total of 5,000 men.
So you continued training more men.
Yeah, until we, and then we had armed people on the top of every mountain. So overnight, what was practically, by all practical purposes, overnight, we had, the communists thought they had those areas and they didn't have them at all. It had been fairly rudimentary training, but they were in all these different areas, right? And their job, what they were trained for and what they expected to do, was to protect their home village. Okay, but as the enemy started attacking certain areas, you needed to send people from this area to help fight with those people in that area. But they were all farmers, and we never paid anybody anything at that point. So the problem is who does the farming and feeds the family if the guy is gone, right? So I suggested that we form what we call the SDU. We wanted to make sure we didn't call it anything to do with the Army. We did not go to the Lao government at all. And so that's where I came up with the SDU name. That was my idea. I gave it to them. Special Guerrilla Unit, but it means Special Guerrilla Unit. Then they were getting some kind of a salary, but they could go from this area and help the people in that area, and then when it was over, they could go back home. But it gave you the ability to build up larger forces to concentrate on areas where you needed to go, and that's what it was all about.
Oh, okay. So the CIA paid.
Well, but that's what's made the big difference. When we started paying them something, then they became a responsibility of the CIA. If you technically look at it, that's what it was. So it tied them in to the CIA effort, right? The CIA was actually paying them a salary to do just that.
And how did that work? The CIA, did you actually pay these individuals, or
No,
did you give it to Von Powell?
We gave the money to VP.
And he knew which groups
yeah,
needed
we
to
had
get
to
paid?
trust him to handle. Because you couldn't use an American to do that. And so he would go to the different areas and pay them that money. And
So then those special guerrilla units became paid CIA units that worked basically
they were getting paid by the CIA.
paid by the CIA, but working under Van Powell.
Oh yeah, that never changed at all. That's the way it always was. CIA didn't really control anybody. I mean, I was the CIA.
Where did you get the money?
They sent me the money in big bags with the money in it. And headquarters set it up because I gave them who the units were and how much money needed to be paid and all this, and then they sent all the money.
They'd send you bags of like cash?
Yeah, but it was all divided up into different areas, different units. It was all written on there, so VP could go out and pay them, because the Hmong are very simple people at that time, very small. So you need a guy like VP to be the guy who pays them the money, right? Because that's what they understand. So the actual Laos, that was always heating up, and so in the end we. That's my first year I went to, actually ended up going up to Laos was 19. Does it say in there?
No, but we can look it up. So it's probably in the early 60s.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, that's what, it was 1960 or 61, I think. And then I stayed there until 68, I guess.
You stayed, okay, so you stayed there until 68? And that whole time that you were there, you were operating this program of small guerrilla units?
Yeah.
How often would you be in contact with Vang Pao?
Oh, well, after I went up to Udon, no, I mean, I'd usually see him every day.
Oh,
I stayed up country sometime, but I usually went back to Udon because then you could read all the traffic from home. But Pat Landry he stayed in Udon all the time, so he'd follow everything. And him and I got along. We went to college together. We'd known each other forever, and we got along really well. And he didn't really like it up country at all.
oh,
So he was content to stay right there in Udon, and I didn't. I enjoyed going up country. I enjoyed it. So I'm the one who dealt mainly with VP because I would see him just about every day.
so would you fly up country every day?
Yeah, because all those airplanes, most of the airplanes that we had flying in Laos would come back to Udon at night.
So tell me about the airplanes that you had flying out of Udon. But when the war escalated and we were in Laos, obviously you had more use of aircraft than just the 40 hours a month for the C-47.
Oh no, that had gone long before we ever went to Laos. That 40 hours a month was long before we went.
What did you use for aircraft?
Well.
And did you have access to an airplane anytime you needed it?
Oh yeah. Because we had so many assigned. We had, of course, we had a whole bunch of, in the beginning, a whole bunch of Helio Couriers. It was a small, single-engine airplane, 4 seats, but it could really fly out of short strips, almost no strip. It could fly out, and it was an extremely reliable airplane. It had very little trouble, but then eventually we got the Porter, which was an aircraft built in Switzerland, the Pilatus Porter, and it carried a bigger load, but it had about the same short takeoff and landing capabilities as the Helio. And it was actually built in Switzerland. But it was a really good airplane. And as I say, it would carry quite a bit more. It carried probably more than 2 times what the Helio Courier would carry.
Which aircraft did you prefer?
Oh no, I like both of them. They were both equally good airplanes, but the Porter just had a lot more capability.
So usually that's what you would have been flying up country in, one of those?
I know. We still use some Helio. I flew the Helio Courier a lot. If you just had one person going, the Helio Courier was fine. And it was a very reliable airplane, and you know, it was a very safe airplane, and you could you'd have to really foul up to kill yourself in a Helio Courier crash.
Was Air America under CIA control?
Oh yeah, Air America was owned by CIA.
So these were all Air America aircraft you were flying in for the most part?
You had, no, you ended up with, we had a couple of other, see what company, Bird and Sons. I forget what airplane, he didn't have Helio Couriers, but I think he had the Porter. But this a friend of mine named Dutch Brongersmal, he was over in Thailand and all that before I got there. But he flew for Air America for a while. Then he flew for himself, and then he worked for an outfit called Bird and Sons, and then they had airplanes flying, and they used Porter. They bought some Porters too.
Now, I know you were in a couple crashes while you were over there
Yeah.
that you managed to walk away from. Can you recall what those were?
Well, the first one was a helicopter. It was very early on, and what I was doing, I was flying up when we first started. Had met Bang Pao, and when I went and met him at that strip down there, and I brought in the first para team, and General Purnett came in and stayed with VP, and so they took off, and they were going to walk up to the place where we were going to start the training. And it was a good long walk. It was going to take them several days. And Purnett and the rest of his Peru team went with VP, and he probably had several Hmong too with him. And they walked up there, and then we came in. I then flew in when they got settled there, and we looked at the place, and that's where we started dropping some weapons in there. But that's where we started the real training. And I don't know how many people, we trained a hell of a lot of people there. And it was the place was named Padong, and that became the VP's headquarters. And you know, one of the big things we had done, it was one of the better things, that we had trained all these Hmong radio operators. Because first thing I did when we started, I asked VP to give me 20 guys who could read and write some language, so we could train them as radio operators. We trained them in the Morse code. You know, they did, because that'll go anywhere. You could have worked a radio in Washington from there with that.
So was there a radio operator in each one of these teams?
Well, what we did is, well, of course, first thing they did is send 20 guys to Hua Hin, because Hua Hin was already, the Peru was already set up. They had a training area with all the stations for you to train, and so we could take all 20 of those guys and train them at the same time. So you'd crank out all those radio operators, right? And then we would give them what's called the RS-1 or the RS-5, RS-1 mainly radio. And what it was, it was two cases miles over there. So, but I said, you know, we'll let them know, and they'll get us another helicopter up here at least by tomorrow morning. I'm sure we can do that. So I said, then if you want to ride with us, we'll go. He said, no, he don't want to ride in the helicopter. See, he'd never ridden in the helicopter.
Oh.
And I don't know, I think that scared the hell out of him. Maybe he thought they always landed like that. I don't know.
So did you spend the night there at that
Oh yeah,
village?
we stayed that night in the.
No.
But you know, they were the Hmong were extremely hospitable. So they had these real long houses, and the people who lived in one long house was probably several different generations of an entire family. And you know, they all slept on the ground down each side of that long building, but they also had a kitchen and everything else in there. And when they would build a fire, but the smoke they had the thatched roof, but the smoke would go out through that thatch. But you know, if you spent any time in one of those buildings, you end up smelling like a smoked ham. But you know, it wasn't bad.
Yeah.
I mean, if you like smoked ham particularly. But anyway.
Now, were you in another airplane crash?
Yeah, a Helio Courier crash. Same thing, he was on takeoff. And I forget exactly what happened, but we ended up falling flat down, broke the whole landing gear broke away like this, and we slid, dust flying everywhere. And the pilot was Fred Walker, a big red-headed guy. I mean, he was huge. And then we just sat there, and he started cussing. He cussed like a bullstreak. He said, you know, God damn these little son of a bitchin' airplanes. A real pilot ought to be flying these damn things at all. He went into the tirade, but nothing happened. Because the Helio Courier was a very safe airplane to crash in. If you're going to crash, that's the best plane to crash in. Because they go real slow. You can get them slowed right down. So it's not often that you kill anybody in a Helio Courier crash. You know, it had big flaps, and you could actually fly at 35 miles an hour.
Wow. Oh, that's like the one that the guy flew through the hangar?
Yeah.
Oh.
Sutman, Ron Sutman. In fact, he just died up in Idaho. I mean, he's actually across into the next state over there. And I used to go see him when I'd go up to visit my son. But he got killed in an airplane crash. You know, he had 2 or 3 airplanes.
Even after the war, you mean?
Oh yeah, this happened not too long ago.
And he got killed in an airplane crash?
Yeah, what he done? He had this big ranch that 250,000 acres, but you know, it was all hilly. Yeah. You could run cattle on it, but you know, not. You had to get them in those mountain valleys and all that stuff. And so when he would come to round up, once a year he'd round the cattle up and run them down to this big corral and pick out the ones he wanted to sell. And he did a lot of the herding with he had 2 Piper Cubs and some other airplane. So he would herd them with that Piper Cub. He'd fly right down there. And they would all, but then when he got them into that big corral, he always fed them real good. So once he started flying over them and all, the cows were all running. They wanted to get down there and have and eat, you know. So I didn't know for exactly what had happened, but he ended up crashing right in front of his house, killed him. And when I went back up there this year, he had married this Finnish woman, beautiful girl. I didn't know her very well. I never talked to her much. But he said she worked for one of the airlines in Finland, and that he had flown into Helsinki, Finland, on a charter flight, taking somebody somewhere for some reason, a charter flight. And that he saw her in the hallway, or in the airport, and he went up to her and asked her to marry him right there, and she agreed and came to the States. She was a beautiful woman.
Wow.
And I don't know if that's all exactly true or not, or if he, but he was one of the strangest guys I ever knew. I liked him, great pilot, probably the best pilot who ever flew in Laos. Maybe the best one who ever flew an airplane. I mean, he was absolutely, but he would stretch that airplane to its limit. And what he did, he came down chasing those cattle, so he had to pull up right by his house where he lived. He had to pull up and go straight up for just a short distance. But as he turned to go up, the engine quit. So the airplane, and then there was nowhere to go, nothing to do, so it crashed and killed him right there in front of his house. So this last summer I went up there. I knew that he had very good relations with the county sheriff in that county where he had all his land. I think his land probably ran into other counties. But anyway, I went up there, and this lady came out at the police station and asked me what I needed, and I told her I wanted to talk about that accident when Sutphin got killed. They knew him, of course, well. So she called this young deputy sheriff out. He came out and we sat down and talked for a long time. And he said his family owned the ranch. It was right next to Sutphin's ranch.
Wow.
And that, you know, when and he said, we were all as shocked as you are, because he was such a great pilot. But he thinks that that's what happened. They got into that position. And he said, when you really, and I know a lot of Sutphin was a registered mechanic, so he did a lot of work on his own airplane. And he said, according to the airplane records, there were some things that he should have done that weren't in the record. Maybe he did them and didn't put them in the record. Don't know if that played a part in the airplane crashing, or did he just overlook one of the things he was supposed to do? We don't know. But anyway, it killed him. I thought his wife, I'd heard somebody say that his wife had said she was going to go back to Finland, sell the ranch, and go, but she didn't. Because in the first place, it would be hard to sell 250,000 acres. Because it's not, I mean, you can make a living on that place. But you know, it's, but I hated from the killers. I'd always go up and talk, and we'd fly all over the country. Oh, God, he had 3 airplanes. And the last time I'd talked to him, the year before last, he told me that he had $8 million in the bank. So he wasn't hurting for money.
No, what's all that? He didn't get it in Vietnam, but he got the airplane skill there.
Oh, no, but he was very smart about money.
Now, in Vietnam, okay, so he was one of the pilots that flew for, did he fly for Air America?
Yeah. But if you talk to any pilot who flew at the same time and knew him, they would all tell you that he was the best pilot they ever saw. And you know, he would, the reason...
Did you get to fly with him often?
Oh yeah, all the time.
Did you have like your own pilot, or was it whoever was there was flying?
No, I flew with different pilots, but the big thing I liked about Sutphin was that, you know, a lot of times you would get a mission that you knew was going to be a very dangerous mission. And if I had that, and I was pretty damn sure that no other pilot would take it, I could talk to Sutphin about it.
And he'd take it?
Well, what he would do, Sutphin was not, he always studied. He studied everything about an airplane. He knew everything that an airplane would do, and he would study it over, and he'd sit there and study it, and I said, you know, I think this mission's too dangerous. I don't believe you can do it, or anything like that. And after a while he'd say, after he studied everything, he would say, I can do it. And he would do it. And most of the other pilots wouldn't have flown it at all. But Sutphin was not harebrained. He always knew what he was doing. So, you know, even when he got killed, the reason he got killed was really because the engine had quit on that plane. Now, did he screw up on the maintenance or not? That's the only thing that you have.
Never be known.
And you'll never know. But I flew all over with him, and he could do absolutely amazing things with an airplane.
Bill, while you were in Thailand and then Laos, I know you got married and you had 2 children while you were over there. Where did your family live when you were flying up country every day?
Well,
where were they staying?
when we first went up there, I mean, my wife still lived in Hua Hin, because that's where we lived, but when we went to Laos, and it looked like we were going to stay there a long time. And it was getting time already to do that. I realized, because Hua Hin did not have any, I mean, they had Thai schools, but they didn't have any schools that taught in English. And I wanted the kids to study in an English school. So they moved to Bangkok.
And did they stay in Bangkok until you left Laos and went back home to the United States? So for the rest of the time until 1968, when you were in Laos, you were up country most every day and you were running these special guerrilla units and doing training. What made you, and I think you touched on this before, you're the one that decided you wanted to leave the country because policy was changing?
I mean, I didn't say it because policy was changing. I mean, I just told them it was about time for me to go home. I wanted to take the family back and let them live in the States for a while. Well, you know, which was really true, but it wasn't the real reason, because, and I was leaving because I thought Shackley was taking the whole program in the wrong direction. You know, he did so many things that, and you know, Pat, who was my deputy, and we'd gone to A&M in the same class and all that. I mean, he agreed with me on, but he stayed. But Pat didn't. He almost never went up country. He stayed in Udon and ran the office, and he was good at it. He did a good job. And I mean, he tried to talk me out of leaving, but I left anyway.
Now, when you left and went back to the United States, did you stay with the CIA? What did you do then?
Oh yeah, no, I stayed. Yeah. I just.
Where did you work? At the Washington?
Well, I know before I left Laos, I'd already asked them that I was going to come back, right? And they said okay, and I had found out from talking to other people that they usually had a slot or two in the Army War College in Carlisle, Pennsylvania. So I asked to go to the Army War College, and that's where they sent me. And the reason I wanted to go there is it would give me a year that I would be up there within driving distance of Washington to decide what I'm going to do next and to try to maneuver myself into a position to do it. And so I made, every once in a while, I'd make a trip to Washington and go into the CIA headquarters and talk to everybody. And so when I came back and left the Army War College and came to Washington, I bought a house. Thought we were probably going to be there for a while. And then I asked him, but see, after I'd settled down in Washington, knew what was going on, I asked them to let me go to the Middle East, because I believe that if you could do the same thing somewhere in the Middle East and create a unit like Peru, but it was made up of Muslims who could go to these places that you were trying to stir up, get them to resist whoever was your enemy out of that whole conflict, that it would be good for them and good for us. But you remember the king of, the king there was a very close friend of the U.S. at that time. Jordan's king, what is his name? He was married to an American woman. So I believe that he would have, what I wanted to do is try to talk him into creating a unit like Peru, but made up of Jordanian people. And I believe that he would have agreed, because he was a very far-sighted guy.
The CIA said no.
Well, what they said was, I talked to the director, and he said, "Oh, we'll never do anything like that again."
Who was the director at that time?
I can't remember exactly.
No. So
But-
what did they have you do then? You stayed with the CIA?
Well, no, then they gave me, they gave me a job in the headquarters. And I was what they call the deputy chief of the Southeast Asia desk.
And what were your duties as that?
Well, you know, you had the chief, was a guy I knew very well. But, you know, he wouldn't hardly let me do anything that I really wanted to do, because he did it himself. And so he would give me, he was actually my boss, because he was a step ahead of me. So he would give me things to do, as monkeying around with personnel problems and all that sort of thing that I didn't care anything about at all. But
How many years did you do that for?
Oh, about a year. I was in Washington about a year, and you know, my wife liked it. The kids went to school there. Everybody liked it all right. We had a nice house, and but so I finally talked to the director and told him that I'd like to go to Jordan and try to do that, and he said, "Oh, Bill, we will never do anything like we did in Laos again." You know, stupid answer, because look how many things we've done. But if you had prepared, I believe it would have been, I believe instead of sending Americans to Afghanistan, all of those places, we could have sent teams of guys who were Islamics. If we trained them right, there's no reason we did it in Asia. Why couldn't we do it there? I don't believe there's any reason that we couldn't. So that's what I was trying to, and you know, they just laughed at my idea, saying, "Oh, we're never going to do anything like that again." Well, they did a million things like that again.
Well, that brings me to the question, what was your opinion about using American forces versus indigenous forces to fight a war?
Oh, that's what I was preaching, is use the indigenous. Don't send the American. Because, you know, when I was in...
Now, I know there was some controversy over that in Laos and Vietnam, and whether the indigenous peoples could carry out the job. What was your feeling about that?
Well, you know, the guys that did all the training in Laos were these Peru guys, right? So, I mean, they did it better than Americans could do it, because we'd spent so long in training. But the trouble with the Americans in headquarters don't want to believe that. So the guy, there's one guy that when he was in Laos, very early in the game, he worked out of the embassy. He worked on what he called Soviet operations. They were trying to recruit Soviets in Laos. The Soviets had an embassy, and there were some of them there, but he wasn't getting anything done. So he wanted to get in the operation that I was running. And the chief of station, who I thought a great deal of, asked me. He said, "This kid wants to get a job, and I'll see if you can find something he can do." So I sent him down south, and I put a Peru team with him, because he had no experience. And the Peru team trained him. They took him to Wahine, put him through all kinds of training, came back up there. I don't know how he did, but he did not too bad. But I thought, with that kind of background, he wouldn't be exactly the same kind of guy. And the tea ready, right? So she would immediately invite me in. Oh, and she said, he'll be home in a few minutes. You just wait here and we'll all have tea together. Well, the first thing you know, you do that a few times, because if you get along very well with the housewife, you're going to get along with everybody there. Because the Thais are, as they say in the old Thai saying, that the Thai women are the back legs of the elephant. I mean, they're behind the scene, but the real power in the family is with them. So, if you had a good relationship with the wife, and she felt comfortable talking to you, and in many cases because you could speak Thai, then you always could get access to that guy. You could get to the point where this guy's a big leader, but you go to his house anytime. They were glad to see you. So in doing that, then you become extremely valuable.
So then, how long did you stay working at the U.S. Embassy in Thailand?
Until I retired.
When was that? Do you know what year?
The reason I decided to retire really was to come back, because I asked them to give me a job in Washington, and they wouldn't do it, because that was right after the end of the Vietnam War.
Okay, so you were still there after the war ended, after the United States pulled out?
Yeah, and yeah, you know, I was still there, but I wanted to go back to the States because of my kids. Now, my daughter was already finished with high school. She went to the international school there, and so we sent her back here, and she enrolled her in Baylor University in Waco. You know, it's a very good school. And but she wasn't too happy about it, but she came back. And you know, on weekends she'd come over, my mother was here. And then eventually I sent my son back, and so he actually finished high school in Meridian. Lived with my mother. My mother got along really well with him. Didn't get along as well with my daughter. She was more difficult to get along with. And, you know, women have more problems getting along together than men do as a rule. And it's just true. I don't know why.
So you decided it was time to retire?
Yeah, I was going to, and so I went up and talked to the chief of station, who had become, I always thought he was a real horse's ass, but he was the deputy for a long time in Bangkok, and he was a real horse's ass. But once he came as chief of station, I was able to do so much for him that he developed a completely different attitude toward me. I got along with him well. Because when he was coming out, I'll never forget this, when it was announced, we knew that he was coming out to be chief of station in Bangkok. The old chief of station was leaving to go home. So in Udorn, Pat Landry was still in Udorn. We had still had a few people up there. Warren Laos was not going on anymore, but we had those people there. And they had always bad-mouthed Dan Arnold, who was the chief of station, right? Dan was a guy who everybody was very unanimous in their attitude toward Dan, that he was a horse's ass. That's it, you know. But so anyway, when so Dan came out, and I had my office right next to his, and I forget how it all came down, but eventually oh yeah, what happened then is this young guy in Udorn who didn't work for the people who were working for Laos. He worked with just the Thai side, the police. First one thing another, he was working over there. He was still up there when I got this job in Bangkok. So he called me one day, or I think he came down and talked to me. And he said, Bill, there's something terrible going on here. He said, you know, all of those guys in Udorn, those Americans up there, they all say they're not, and they say the Thais all say they're not going to cooperate with Mr. Arnold when he gets here. They're going to be against him. he can't do his job like that. I said, just sit down and think, and don't say a damn word to anybody about that. I said, sure, he's coming out here. He represents the President of the United States. He's the chief of the CIA station. They're going to work with him. I mean, that's the way it's going to be. So he finally went back. But he kept worrying this idea that they ought to tell Don. And he eventually came down and went directly to the chief's office and said, okay, the retired general who's running the operations up there is coming down to Bangkok. So he suggested to Arnold that he set up a cocktail party and invite the guy to that party. So he got his wife all set up. They made everything hors d'oeuvres and all that crap. And it was 2 Thai generals. And the 2 generals never showed up at Arnold's house. So he was really peeved. And so the next morning when Dan came in, he came in and shut the door, and he had this really grim look on his face. I said, what in the hell has happened now? And he said, Bill, I thought you were my friend. And then he told me what this guy had said, and these guys never showed up. He'd went to all the trouble of arranging the cocktail. Never said nothing to me, because I would have warned him about it. So he said, and I said, Dan, you've got to think about this. I think what you should do is ignore this altogether. Don't pay any attention to it. I said, you are representing the United States here. You represent the President of the U.S. These people are going to work with you. Don't pay attention to what a guy says in Udon. The Thai government is going to work with you because they're going to do that with anybody in your position. So all you got to do is go ahead and do what you're supposed to do.
And did he? Is that what happened?
Well, at first he was still worried about it. Okay, then what happened, I said, Dan, what you ought to do is get in touch with this guy who's, I guess he was the prime minister by that time. And he was obviously the coming big man in Thailand. So I said, Dan, you need to get in touch with this guy. So he said, you think you could help me arrange that? And I said, yeah, let me see what I can do. So I called his office, talked to his secretary, and said I'd like to speak to him. He knew me. So I talked to him, and I told him, I said, I have a new boss who just arrived, and he would like to pay a courtesy call on you. And the guy said, could he be here in an hour?
Yeah.
So he was anxious to actually meet him, see.
Yeah.
So then I went over with Dan, met the guy, and then him and Dan became as close as if 2 fleas, you know what I mean? And that guy made Dan's whole career. Because he was the prime minister, Dan could talk to him about anything, so it really put him in a strong position for the rest of his career here. So when I decided to leave, Dan said to me, he said, Bill, I hate to see you go. If you want to go, that's what we'll have to let you do. But he said, I guarantee you that you can stay here and do whatever you want for as long as I'm the chief here. And you know, you don't get many guys who say that. And I told him I had, you know, personal reasons for needing to go back.
So so then you came home to the United States and retired from the CIA?
Yeah.
And what did you do?
Yeah, because they wouldn't, there's other things I wanted to do, but they wouldn't let me.
What did you do after you retired from the CIA?
Things that you won't believe. You know, what I did is I thought everything would be all right. I mean, my retirement was enough, and we lived here, had the house and all that. And so, but my wife got sick. And she had a lot of very serious health problems. Because it turned out that she had a real serious case of diabetes. And you know, that eventually kills you. No matter what you do, you just can't do that much about it. So she didn't want to move. She wanted to stay here, but I needed more money than my pension was getting, so I had to do something. All right, now I had Shorty lived here, and who else? We had somebody else. Oh yeah, then I had them. I called my sister-in-law and asked her could she get some other Thai woman to come out and stay with us to help out with all this stuff. And so she sent this. I knew her. She was young, and she came over too. So we had both of them. And then because I knew what was coming. My wife was going to go through a very serious problem where she'd have to spend a lot of time in the hospital and all that because she had this serious case of diabetes, and it eventually killed her. But I knew I had to have more money to support all of this. So I'm saying, but I don't want to move because she liked it here, and she didn't want to move. But there's not a job in Bosque County that pays that much. So you got to have, okay, but I wanted to keep living here, so what can you do? I could have gone to a big city somewhere. I probably could have gotten a job. It would give me enough income because I knew a lot of stuff. But anyway, I was watching all the papers and everything, and I suddenly saw that this outfit was a trucking outfit. And they were having a big meeting in Waco where they were inviting people to come who would like to work for that trucking outfit. So I went. And what it basically was is you're going to be a truck driver. But you had to get your own truck and all that. So they told me, how much money you could probably make and all this kind of stuff. So I said, well, I'm going to give it a try. So I bought a truck, and it turned out I made lots of money.
So
I made all the money I
trucker?
needed, but I was driving the truck and went coast to coast.
How did you like that?
Oh, I liked it fine. Because you travel everywhere. You see places you would never go. Otherwise, you meet all kinds of people. It's a really interesting. I mean, I actually enjoyed it. But a lot of my friends would say, a guy like you with all the things you've done, your educational background, how could you come down and be a truck driver? I said, really easy. You just got behind the wheel and started driving.
How long did you do that?
5 years.
Then did you really retire?
Yeah, because by that time, well, I don't think it was too long after that my wife probably died. Because she was really, really sick. She knew. I don't remember exactly the timing, but and she was a good person, and very gutsy. So I remember one day she was in the hospital over there, and where she got all of her medical work, and I was over there talking to her. And she asked me, she said, when I'm gone, are you going to marry again? I said, hell no, I ain't going to marry again. It took me 40 years to get used to you. I don't have another 40. And she laughed. She liked my answer. But it was the actual truth. I wouldn't want to get married again. How are you going to get... I mean, the chances of you finding somebody that you really get along with at that age is pretty poor. Don't need it.
Well, Bill, you've had quite the variety in your career of things that you did. What lessons would you say you learned from establishing the SGUs in Laos, and your involvement with the whole secret war?
Well, I mean, if you really ask me, I found out that I could do anything. You just got to be sure you know what you're doing and don't be afraid to try. And I believed in myself that I could do anything that I set out to do.
You think you got that attitude first from your mother?
Yeah, I think most of it, because she did the same thing. I mean, when she first became a widow, the only job she could find, the very first job, was she was a waitress in the restaurant. But at the same time, she had a pretty good education for people from Oklahoma at that time. She had finished high school and gone to what they call normal school, a teacher's school, basically. So she had a pretty good education, and she was very smart. So she worked what she could. She worked for that lawyer in Borger, and most of the time he didn't pay her anyway. He ended up owing her a lot of money. It didn't pay her. But she started taking all of the civil service examinations, because she decided the best place for a woman to work would be in the civil service, because they treat women better than anywhere else. Not the same as men, but close. And that's what she did. She went to work. She got this job. So she finally they assigned her to a job in Waco at the Veterans Administration. The office for all of Texas at that time was in Waco. They only had one office because people hadn't come home from World War II yet, so they didn't have that many veterans. And so she stayed there, and then when the World War II started, and the people started coming home from World War II, then all of a sudden they opened 4 other offices like Waco, Houston, I forget all the other places, and then they transferred her to Houston when they opened that office. And so she moved to Houston. I was already going to college by then, but I started going to Houston on the weekend when I went home. And then I finally finished college and went to work for the CIA. That's it.
What became of the special guerrilla units, do you know? After you returned to the United States and weren't managing them anymore, do you know what happened to them?
Yeah, the same thing that happened to all the Hmong. Okay, they were still operating pretty much like they had always operated, right? And you had Americans working up there. But then when I may have still been overseas when that happened. I'm not really sure now. No, I think I still was. I was still in Thailand. And what happened then is when U.S. decided to get out of Vietnam. That was the crucial thing, right? Because when they decided to get out of Vietnam, what it really meant, Henry Kissinger came out and made this big peace treaty with the Vietnamese, but everybody knew it wasn't worth the paper it was written on. Once the U.S. pulled out of it, they would just take over everything. And that's what they did. So the Hmong knew that they couldn't survive. The communists wouldn't treat them good at all, because they had been the ones who fought the communists. So when the last Americans finally got on that airplane and flew out, they did it so suddenly. They didn't prepare anybody that they were going to do this. So it scared the hell out of because they suddenly didn't have the Americans, so they couldn't get their ammunition and all that to do the fighting. So then they all just poured across the border into Thailand. Thousands of them. And I was working down here. So the first thing and then we started flying. They pressed Air America to start flying some Hmong out that were still at the Long Jane, because all these others were coming, and they moved everybody to it had been during the Vietnam War, it had been a base for the Marines, Marine Air. So they moved, thousands of Hmong went there first. But they had to move them. There was no facilities, anything else. So they came to me. I was working in Bangkok, and I said, we have to find a place to put them temporarily until we can figure out what the hell we're going to do. But at least the U.S. recognized that they had some sort of responsibility here. So the first thing to do is we had to build some temporary housing that they could live in, right? So I went to my brother-in-law, who was a big wheel in Thailand at that time, and explained my problem to him, and he said, sure, we'll. So he found the land that belonged to the government, And so then they built these temporary. So they had a little house deal with a kitchen and all that, and they all had where they could plant a kitchen garden, so they could grow some of their own food. And then USAID supplied a lot of the rice and all that stuff to them. So but they still hadn't decided in the long run what they're going to do. But Lionel, what's his name, Lionel? He was the guy head of Refugees International at that time, and he spent a lot of his time in Thailand, and he's the one who arranged that the Refugees International would help the Hmong, and they decided to bring him to the U.S. And Lionel became a very good friend. He still is. He lives in Washington, but they set all this up, and they started moving the Hmong to the U.S. And I don't know who did all the work in the U.S., but they went to a lot of cities in the U.S. who agreed to take the Hmong. And they would go there, and they would give them some kind of temporary place to stay until they could kind of get settled. So they went and all that. So he asked me to go to Laos for a while, to Thailand for a while. And he would come out on visits. And of course, with my background in Thailand, I was able to arrange for him to talk to anybody he wanted to. And it was pretty successful. So I was able to do a lot of things and make money out of them.
Bill, is there anything else dealing with your CIA career that you'd like to share that I haven't asked you about?
I guess I can't think of anything. I think it's pretty well covered. Well, I would have stayed in the CIA if they'd given me if they'd let me do what I wanted to, like go to the Middle East and I still believe that I could have done something there. Because the king of Jordan was a very good friend of the U.S. and he was pretty much a forward-leaning kind of guy. So I think you could have talked him into creating an organization that you could train, and then instead of sending Americans to Afghanistan in those places like that. You could have used these Muslim groups.
Do you think that we could learn lessons from what you set up in Laos and in our present conflict in Iraq and Afghanistan?
Well, maybe somebody. It's probably late because if you're going to use that sort of thing, it's better to have done it early on. But, I mean, today the pattern's already set. And, you know, I mean, it looks like we're really getting out of those areas. Now, how it's going to turn out in the end, it's hard to say.
Well, Bill, I'd like to thank you very much for your time, for your interview.